So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. I'm excited to have a guest today. I've been doing a few solo episodes, so it's nice to have some company again and to be delving into another person's healing journey and story. So today I have Audrey Burke with me from Durham, North Carolina. Audrey is a licensed massage therapist, a somatic experiencing practitioner, and a transforming touch practitioner. A lot of the work she does now is a lot of the work that she experienced or pursued or explored in her own healing journey that led to a lot of the breakthroughs and insights that led to her healing and her story. So it's this beautiful kind of weaving of how she healed and what she now brings into the world through her own journey. A big piece of the work that Audrey does is touch work and finding that medicine through her wounds, the power of touch. So we're going to talk about that and how that looked in her own journey. And Audrey, her just general story that we're going to get into is what a lot of us can recognize or relate to, this experience of confusing symptoms, the ones that have a diagnosis but don't, and just we get this label of what Audrey got was irritable bowel syndrome. Some people get fibromyalgia. We just get these diagnoses that are catch-all, but don't really explain what's going on this deeper level. And so Audrey did what a lot of us do, and she'll share her story with us, which is just going on this exploration of trying all these things. And it was when she landed in the world of somatic experiencing that she really started to find answers to illness. We're going to hear all about that today and of what she learned through her own wounds and how that became her medicine and gift that she now brings into the world. Welcome, Audrey. So happy to have you here today. So excited to hear your story and learn from you today. Thank you for being here.
Having me. I know we all have mixed feelings about social media, but it's really cool that we've met on social media and now we're getting to connect face to face. And yeah, just grateful for the opportunity to spread awareness about sacred illness and somatic experiencing and all that goes along with that.
Yay, likewise, I agree about social media, but I think everyone, for the most part, I've had on this podcast is from meeting through Instagram. So for better or for worse, it brings people together that wouldn't otherwise. A lot of my clients find me that way. So it's a good network, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So yeah, without further ado, I'd love to jump into your story. Like we talked before we hit record, I just like folks to tell their story and share your journey with us. And wherever you want to start, whatever feels like the kind of maybe beginning point or like the place where you like, and we'll take it from there and see what comes up as we go along.
All right. Sounds good. Before I dive into my story, I just noticed checking in with my body a little bit. I'm on one of these yoga kneeling chairs, feeling my knees. As I was sharing with you before we got started, it's new for me to be talking about my story. As a highly sensitive person, I'm really comfortable holding space for people. Now that I'm starting to share my story and being on podcasts, it's like I'm going through this developmental phase of finding my voice, sharing my story, and learning how to communicate things. And it does feel vulnerable and exciting. I imagine maybe some people did this when they were in college. I didn't. I'm now doing it at 40 years old. But yeah, just grateful for the opportunity. And I also noticed, even as I was preparing for this podcast, thinking about sharing my story, I could feel my internal speeding up. It brings me back to the time when my illness started, of this faster pace, sense of urgency, my nervous system being stuck on. Even thinking about telling my story can bring back some of those internal sensations. So I'm just reminding my body that this isn't happening right now. I'm now in the future, sharing my story, and I don't have to tell it all at once. We could share a little bit and no sense of urgency right in this moment. I just wanted to share that with the audience, but also talk to my body as we get started here. I think first I'll give a quick kind of headline of what happened, and then we can dive into some more of the details. When I look at my healing journey, I feel like there was two main phases. One started about 11 years ago, right around my 29th birthday. I was living in Bologna, Italy at the time with my ex-boyfriend for his job. I got a really bad cold for a few weeks. After that, I had this nervous system breakdown where I started having physical symptoms like the irritable bowel syndrome, amenorrhea. I didn't get my period for 4 years. That started the whole healing journey. And then in 2020, after I had started SC therapy, I'd been in SC therapy for a few months, I was trying to find a place to myself to rent. I ended up moving into a house with mold. And so then it was like, at the time, so maddening that I'm trying so hard to heal and find a safe place to do it. And then that catapulted me into phase 2 of sacred illness, which came with a whole new set of symptoms. And it's honestly something I haven't talked about that much because I think it was so hard. And that was like living hell for 2.5 years. Luckily, I've emerged from hell, I believe.
Good.
Yes. But yeah, there's these two kind of distinct phases, and the symptoms were very different in both of them. Maybe I'll start back in Italy, if that feels okay. And my story now probably began way before I was even conceived. Now that I've gotten into trauma healing work and looked at my ancestry, there's trauma in my grandparents, great-grandparents before I was ever born. So I know my story started way before I was even on this planet. In Italy, I had a really bad cough for a few weeks. At the time, I was a fairly healthy 29-year-old. I hadn't been to the doctor since I was 20 years old, and I had no idea what kind of journey I was about to go on. I think the first thing I noticed was I started losing a lot of weight. I ended up losing like 30 pounds. By the time I left Italy, I was only like 103 pounds.
Oh.
I had the alternating constipation, diarrhea. It was like overwhelming even to go outside, just the smell of the sidewalk and the exhaust from buses. I was having mood swings. I feel so bad for my ex-partner that I was having mood swings and panicking about how I needed to get out of Bologna to go to the countryside. And my period stopped. I did try seeing various practitioners in Italy. Some of them were helpful. There was one American doctor who I remember feeling around my abdomen and being like, "Ooh, I think I found a brown tumor." And I didn't know what he meant, but it was basically poop. Because I was like, "I have a tumor?" Oh no, I was so constipated. He was a quirky guy, but he was the one who was like, "This sounds like it could be irritable bowel syndrome." I came home and Googled irritable bowel syndrome. I quickly found cookbooks for irritable bowel syndrome and found out about the low FODMAP diet. The first phase of my healing was very much focused on food and what I was eating. Some of it was really helpful to reduce low FODMAPs for a while, but I also think that then I was just like cooking all the time, like cooking from scratch. And I think that just became an added stressor at some point too, where it wasn't like nourishing and relaxing to be preparing these food. There was like a lot of nervous system dysregulation around it. And then at some point, I decided I was going to leave Italy. Again, I had some practitioners in Italy that were helpful, but some of them didn't speak English. And I was just like, if I'm going to heal, I would like to work with practitioners that are speaking my language. And I had in my head that I wanted to go to Berkeley, California. There was cool stuff happening in Berkeley. There was actually one place I found from Italy. It's called Three Stone Hearth in Berkeley. It's a community supported kitchen where they sell food on the GAPS diet, like bone broth. I was just like, I want to go there. Or I just want to go somewhere where there's like nutrient dense food or like good food options, which wasn't the case where I grew up. I had an aunt in San Francisco, so I was able to land with my aunt in San Francisco, got a job in Berkeley. During this phase of my life, I was trying to figure out my career. I used to do informational interviews with people about what their job was. I was doing some informational interview with someone in the Mission of San Francisco. Walking back to my aunt's house, I happened to walk by an acupuncture clinic. I was like, acupuncture, I've always heard about that. I want to try it. And so I ended up starting there, and later ended up more in Northern California, going to acupuncture regularly. And after doing that for probably several months, I just happened to mention to the woman, like, oh yeah, I haven't had my period in a couple of years. And she was like, oh, so Chinese herbs and taking beef liver pills. The acupuncture was helping. The first doctor I saw in Italy was a gastroenterologist. I wrote down all my symptoms in English, translated them into Italian, and then I handed her this piece of paper. When I walked into her office, she looked at the paper, then looked at me and just pointed to her head, and then wrote me a prescription for anxiety medication. And I was really pissed when I left, because I was like, there's no discussion whatsoever. Like, we didn't exchange any words, and you're just going to prescribe me medication. Before I moved to Italy, I had done a yoga teacher training. So I did have some idea that there was a mind-body connection. So at this point, I decided I did a yoga teacher training, but I don't have a meditation practice. And I had this idea that I was going to heal myself like through meditating. And without any prior training, I would just sit on a pillow in my bedroom with my eyes closed. I can tell you, I was not meditating. I was just sitting there thinking for hours, coming up with ideas, writing them down, and getting on the internet and searching. It was not a meditative experience. But shortly after I got to the US, I'm like, I'm really going to learn how to meditate. So I went and did a 10-day Vipassana, again, without any prior meditation experience. I show up at this retreat, still very constipated, and nobody warned me that meditating for 10 hours a day actually makes you more constipated because you're
not moving.
And I was also trying to follow the low FODMAP diet. And at breakfast, they were serving prunes, but I wasn't eating the prunes because they're not FODMAP friendly. Apparently, when you meditate, you're supposed to eat the prunes because that helps you go. Day 6 of that, I had the most painful bowel movement with blood at it. And I did make it. I called, checked in with my doctor. They were like, as long as you're not feeling faint, like you're fine, you could stay, like finish out the retreat. And when I got home to my aunt's place in San Francisco, and she asked me how the meditation retreat was, what I took away from it was I had been processing all my time in Italy. I'd been processing my whole life at this meditation retreat. And what I came away with was, it's all my fault. All of my symptoms, it's all my fault because I have negative thought patterns or I am too rigid. But basically, this is all my fault. There's something wrong with me and I'm causing this to happen to myself. Yeah, that definitely feels like I've heard you talk on your podcast before about some of the beliefs we have and being able to look at our beliefs. But that was a belief I had very early on my healing journey, that this was somehow all my fault. But I was trying so many things, the meditation, I did another yoga teacher training, did the acupuncture, and some of it was helping, but I could still feel that something was off. I had a level of like jumpiness, this like startle response that I would start noticing when I had roommates. I just was like, there's something still off. I didn't quite know what it was. I had never really considered therapy before. It just wasn't something that was common among my friends or my family. At one point, my aunt, when I was still staying with her and I was trying to decide if I was going to stay with my ex-partner or not, was just like, oh, have you thought of talking to a therapist? And I was so relieved to hear that because it finally felt like a piece of advice that might be helpful. I was like, oh, yeah, I think I want to talk to a therapist. I only did maybe 5 sessions with a Hakomi therapist in San Francisco, and I really liked her. It was a good experience, but we decided that I was going to end that relationship. And then I was like, all right, I made that decision. So what's the point of still going to therapy? And I also at the time didn't realize I could use health insurance to pay for therapy. So I was paying for it out of pocket. I actually did have health insurance at the time, but I just did not know. So I was like, okay, I got what I came for and I don't want to pay however much money it was every week. I didn't land in therapy again until 2017. I moved from California to Asheville just to get back on the same coast as my family. I had been moving around so much and didn't feel like I had a consistent support team because I was moving and just not in the same place. So when I landed in Asheville, I was like, this is it. You're going to get rooted. You're going to find a place to rent. and you're going to get a support team and you're going to stay here. I started working with an integrative doctor there. And it was in our first appointment, I went in, started crying. And at the end of our first session, he slipped me a piece of paper and was like, I think you should probably read these books by Peter Levine.
Oh, wow.
And he had written down a list of therapists for me. And again, I was really relieved. Like anytime someone suggests to me I go to therapy, I'm like, oh, yes, that's what I need. But the catch here was the first therapist he put on the list in bold was not a somatic experiencing therapist. She was a Hakomi therapist. I worked with her for 2 years and we did make some progress. What I found out after the 2 years was that like Hakomi's not really the best choice for people who have chronic dysregulation. If you're doing Hakomi, it's assumed you already have some regulation on board, but it doesn't quite have the same toolbox as somatic experience for helping someone to stabilize their nervous system or working with developmental trauma.
Yeah.
And so even though there were parts of it that were helpful, I think there were other parts that were really not what I was needing. So it was after working with her for 2 years, the same doctor is now, I think you should read this book called The Body Keeps the Score. When I would go to this doctor's office, if he tried to move my hair to get at my ear or whatever, I would almost jump out of my seat.
Wow.
So there was, I'm sure he was picking up on signs of, okay, this person has a startle response.
Yes.
And after I listened to The Body Keeps the Score, which is a lot about somatic therapy, I was like, this isn't what I'm doing in therapy right now. Even though I was doing a little bit of Hakomi with my therapist, we were mostly doing talk therapy. And I was like, this is not the Peter Levine stuff. Like I read the book and this is not what Peter Levine talks about. So I finally went to that therapist and was like, I think I need to work with someone who specializes in trauma. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't specialize in trauma. And I was like, what? Why didn't you tell me this 2 years ago?
Yeah.
And I understand, like my doctor did a really great job of pointing me in the right direction, but even he maybe didn't understand the difference between these different kinds of somatic therapy. He's saying, read these books by Peter Levine, but then sends me to a Hakomi therapist who that's not Peter Levine's body of work. I eventually got where I needed to go.
Good.
But it was definitely and then finally, I think it's 2019, I landed in the office of my first somatic experiencing practitioner, Sherry Azar. And she had a very similar scope of practice of what I'm doing now. Licensed therapist. She was a licensed massage therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, transforming touch practitioner. She had also done the DARE training with Diane Poole-Heller and the BASE training with Dave Berger. So she was really an expert in the field of trauma, developmental trauma, attachment stuff. And it was after our very first session together that I just felt this huge sigh of relief and was like, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for the last 5 years.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear your story as you talk about these different modalities you've tried, where there is that sort of sense of relief when talk therapy is recommended. And even if it's not the right modality, there's a sense of, yes, that's the right direction. And then when you finally align with the right modality, then it's, yes, this is what my system has been needing.
Yeah. And I've learned to be a little bit more gentle with myself around that, because I definitely have a pattern of being very self-critical. And I was probably mad at myself of like, why did you stay with a therapist who wasn't a good fit for 2 years? What's wrong with you? But I've realized that you have to make those mistakes and learn the hard way and feel what doesn't work and what does work in order to develop that body signals.
100%. It's a trust muscle. The first time you experience it, you don't know what you don't know. We don't know that feeling in the body means whatever it means. There's a million reasons why not following our intuition into away from familiarity and out of known territory is scary. And we don't want to do that. And to some extent too, like I think I see this a lot in folks when working with a professional, there's this feeling of, you know what you're doing, so I'm going to stick with you kind of thing. Thinking about that therapist you're working with, it might have been also on her end at some point to be like, I don't do what I think. And I think sometimes it's hard for practitioners to discern if they're the right fit, but there's a lot of dynamics at play there. So I think it's just examining where we can be hard on ourselves and leaning more into this place of forgiveness and trusting the process, because you got to where you needed to go Anyway, so as you were working with her, what were some of the insights or ahas, or aside from that somatic experience of being like, this is it, how was that confirmed to you? Or what kind of insights did you start to have that was helping you understand that these were the things that were missing in your journey?
I believe we did touch in one of our very first sessions. And I realized how important touch was for my nervous system. She was doing Stephen Terrell's protocol called 7-point protocol, where the practitioner is supporting you on different points in your body, like gently holding the adrenal glands, the brainstem, the ankles. There was a session where she was teaching these rocking movements I could do at home by myself. We did them also on the massage table, where she would be rocking me a little bit, and she would even sing to me. She would sing lullabies. And it was so different than the talk therapy I had been doing. So it really helped to shift my perspective of what therapy can be, and how sometimes not talking about the content can be so helpful, and just supporting the regulation.
Yeah.
And also seeing how, as we do the regulation work, my beliefs could change more organically without me having to consciously try to figure out what are the limiting beliefs I have, and then trying to change them from the top down. I could just see, oh, as we do this regulation work, things are shifting without as much effort.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I think that right there is so important for people to hear, because so often in my one-on-one stuff in my community, or even on Instagram, people will send me messages. There's this kind of note of so many people don't remember childhood or don't know why they're dysregulated. And so there's this fear of, then I can't heal, right? If I don't know why I am the way I am, then I can't heal. And I think there is this need for us to divest from this conscious mind. That's the world of talk therapy, and not to discredit it, because I think there's so much value in talking things out and piecing together our story and being witnessed in that way. Absolutely. There's so much need for that in general. And we have to stop thinking that the head is the end all be all spot for everything to happen. It is in creating safety in the body that is the key to the lock we've been seeking ultimately. Ultimately, what this work is moving us toward. Is that how you would articulate it? Like, how would you describe what you just said? It's like when your body was able to go through these movements and be held, what was happening for you that allowed things to start releasing?
Touch is so helpful, especially for those early wounds. If we have wounds before the age of 5 or 3, because we don't actually have memories at that point in our life. We're pre-verbal, we're precognitive. And so that's where the somatic work is so helpful, because those experiences are still held in the body, but through tension and numbness, our attachment styles, our behaviors, but it doesn't always have a memory associated with it. Part of my healing journey as well was having to let go of trying to figure it all out so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But in receiving the work and having conversations with the practitioners, realizing you don't actually have to figure it all out. We can still heal without knowing the story, just through working with the physiology and supporting regulation.
Yes, beautiful. I feel like that's the line for people to really nail into. You don't have to know the story. You just work with how your body feels and what it's experiencing, and working to create safety in response to that. Yeah, that's beautiful. And so as you were working with Sherry, what were you starting to experience on a physical symptom level? What did that start to look like for you? And IBS, amenorrhea, like all those kinds of things you were mentioning, like how did that start to shift, if you can recall?
I believe I did start getting my period again before I started seeing Sherry. And I believe that was through Chinese herbs, but I also moved in with female roommates, and like my cycle synced up with theirs. But I did have a very powerful experience one of our first sessions, which I've talked about before, but at the time I was having trouble gaining weight. And I think one doctor or health coach had told me I should be eating 3,000 calories a day. And so I was doing that and still not gaining any weight. Wow. And this was another period where I'm spending all my time cooking and eating. I was sick of cooking and still not gaining any weight. And I was still working, doing some acupuncture at the time, but I had one session with Sherry where she did some visceral work, where she had her hand on my belly. We did have some interesting memories come up of my childhood around food. Actually, she actually got in her mouth the taste of apple juice and like crackers and was
Mm.
like, is that familiar to you at all? And it brought me back to this memory of being in my basement, my church basement as a kid. And that's like what maybe they would give us as snack. And it actually grosses me out thinking about that combination of like apple juice and
Wow.
saltines for some reason. But there was also memories of growing up. I didn't really like the food that my parents would make me. I even got in trouble in the second grade because I had thrown out my sandwich and the teacher found it in the trash can. It was like a bologna sandwich on potato bread with American cheese. But some of these memories came up of like me just not really even liking food as a kid, which was interesting. But after that session, I became ravenously hungry. Just after her having her hand on my stomach and doing some of the somatic work, the next day I had packed food for the whole day and I ate it all for lunch and had to pull over later and buy more food because I was still hungry. And between that and the acupuncture, I gained 5 pounds pretty quickly.
Wow. That's incredible. So it was almost like your body like almost had permission to enjoy food again or to have an appetite or something like that.
I also wonder about just the touch work and the visceral work helping my nervous system get back more into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. But unfortunately, I had only been working with Sherry for a few months before I moved into the moldy house. Just finally found the support I'd been needing for 5 years and then had this whole other slew of symptoms shortly after.
Yeah. And did that lead you into deeper exploration or learning, or did that just seem like an unfortunate detour that took you off your path for a while? I mean, it did, but also was there something that came out of it, I guess?
I feel like I'm a much better somatic experiencing practitioner because of the mold experience. I work with clients who've experienced chronic Lyme, mold, or other mysterious illnesses. And I feel much more capable of holding space for them now that I've been through that myself. While I still feel grief over what my body went through, I'm able to also hold gratitude. I think some of the best healers have to go through the illnesses that they'll later be able to help people heal from. Even as I go through the somatic experiencing training, it's clear to me a lot of people don't know how to work with these more challenging syndromes and just how we really have to work differently with that type of nervous system. I feel much more capable and confident of working with it now.
That's powerful. And we talked about that before hitting record. You refer to it in shaman traditions, and I think of it as a wounded healer idea. The wounds we are inflicted with, they help us become more potent in our work. It's such a different feeling when you're working with someone who has walked in your shoes. Everyone's story is different and unique, but there's that shared experience of really grasping what a person is experiencing and being able to hold space for them. You had used the word attunement, and that word obviously is key to nervous system safety, regulation, and everything is this idea of attunement. And I feel like that's the core of what we're talking about, is when you really deeply understand and see someone, that's attunement, right? And so if you've walked in their shoes, if you've experienced that illness, then there's just that different, not that you have to have a practitioner who has had the exact same thing as you. It's just different. There's that different feeling. You said, I wrote this in my notes as you were saying it, like your integrative doctor was really attuned to you in this way that saw you and put you in this correct direction, so to speak. It's interesting because even technically your Italian doctor was pushing you in the right direction, right? When she pointed to her head and gave you medicine. But right, there's that next step that's missing in that protocol or in that practice of medicine, where technically anxiety could be driving the symptoms physically in the body, but why is the person anxious? It's not because they're lacking in a medication, it's what's underneath it. It's interesting when I talk to folks, there's always these experiences that nudge them closer to that place until we get the practitioner or we walk past the acupuncture office or whatever that little turning point is, that little ping that happens inside our body where we're like, I think that might be the thing. And so I'm really curious because this feels like you had mentioned being hard on yourself or self-critical. And then when you came out of your Vipassana retreat too, there was that story of it's all my fault. Something is wrong with me. I'm causing this to happen to myself. And so I'm curious, have you worked with those beliefs specifically, or have they shown up since you came away from that retreat?
Yeah, it's definitely morphed now into it's not all my faults. And I feel like I'm able to hold both sides, seeing which parts aren't my faults and actually which things maybe I should take accountability for. Like even moving into the moldy house.
Yeah.
I saw a picture of the house, didn't actually have a great feeling when I saw the picture, and like I moved in anyways. So there are some things that like, okay, you are responsible for that decision. And it's also not all my fault. And I think the more and more I learn about the nervous system, the more I learn about trauma, the more I learn about the nervous system, I'm able to have more compassion for myself and the way I show up in the world, the way other people show up in the world. I realized one other core belief that was keeping me maybe just upset for a while was this belief like, oh, this shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Then I realized actually, when you look at my lineage, what my ancestors went through, what I've been through in my life, I was in an incubator after birth. I'm a C-section baby, also have a history of sexual trauma, potentially as a child and in college. So it's like the way that actually my nervous system is showing up right now is exactly the way you would expect someone's nervous system who's been through all those things to be showing up. Like even when I get mad, why didn't you listen to your gut? Yeah, people who have experienced these kind of trauma have a hard time trusting their gut instincts. Like, this actually makes a lot of sense.
Yes, that is, I think that language change is so crucial because no one should suffer. Like there's no deserving of suffering or pain or trauma or any of the things, but there's an understandable kind of cause and effect. I can't remember who said that, but I talked to someone who worked with someone who said, you make sense. That was their phrase. So I really leaned into that heavily because I think there's so much validation when it's, no, you're not broken. Like you're not a bad person or you don't deserve this or anything. I like to put the phrasing on it too with the nervous system. It's like this merciful response. Like your body is adapting and trying to survive and keep you healthy and alive and safe in the best way that it can, but it's responding to some pretty intense inputs. And so the response isn't going to be comfortable because the input is not comfortable. That's the beautiful way in which the body is pulling us in and being like, I can hold this for you and I can respond to this for you, but maybe let's work on this because it's not comfortable and it's not leading to the best, most vibrant life that you can possibly have. And that's the sacred illness idea. And I think it's really important too, what you're saying. I also just saw this on Instagram. Someone else was talking about this idea that you touched on, which is this idea that illness doesn't start with you. Like chronic symptoms don't begin in our body in a certain moment. It's epigenetic, it's inherited, it's ancestral. Like we are carrying so much from so long. Do you have a sense of, like you've mentioned the trauma in your family, and obviously we don't have to get into the full ancestral lineage or anything like that, but as you've done your own healing work, have you had a sense of kind of ancestral stories or patterns? Does there feel like there's a theme or something that's come up for you that's been like giving you that sense of I'm a cycle breaker in that way, or I'm doing this deeper healing work for my family?
One ancestor that sticks out in particular is my great grandpa on my dad's side was actually an orphan starting at the age of 12. His father passed away and then his mother was put into a mental institution and then she died there. So by the age of 12, he was living on the streets of New York City by himself. And there's stories that he finally got married when he was 40, but he used to scream in his sleep. His wife didn't like sleeping in the same room as him. And he was an alcoholic for a while. And then at some point, he just stopped drinking. When I think of the theme, it's just probably not enough co-regulation, like not enough attunement and co-regulation from your caregivers. And then how does that pass down through generations?
Totally. How does it influence their kids and their kids just from that lack of receiving it on that basic level? I think that's so interesting to reflect on because we all have those stories of our family members, such and such uncle or grandpa, and isn't that a wild story? But if we really think about it, that's in your DNA, like that's in your body. We understand that now through epigenetic changes, that there are changes that happen in our bodies from generation to generation based on the trauma and experiences a person has in their lifetime. So it's a story, but it's also interwoven into your cells and into your beings. Even though it's obviously not maybe that profound on that same level that they were experiencing it, there's still something in your programming that is primed and ready to respond or has that kind of worldview. I think it's fascinating to think of illness in that way. There never should be this sense of I did this or I should have eaten this way or it's because of this lifestyle. Like it's this accumulation over lifetimes that can culminate into this kind of like physical expression.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's the sacredness of illness. It's this opportunity of like, how do I now heal these deeper patterns that have been running through my lineage? Because we have options and opportunities that our great grandpas obviously did not have in their lifetime.
Yeah, in the world of developmental trauma, there's this concept of locus of control. You can either have an extreme internal locus of control where everything's your fault, like you're in control of everything, or an extreme external locus control where you're like, this is just happening to me. I just have bad luck. This is my fate. I've definitely seen points in my healing journey where I've had one of the extremes. Ideally, we want a healthy balance of seeing what's in my control and what's not. I try to hold both of those as well. What parts of this are not my fault? And also, what do I have control over now as an adult to maybe make different choices?
Absolutely. And I think that's a delicate line I walk in this work, because calling illness sacred is evocative. That's the point of it. It's I want people to like have a reaction. So they're like, what does that mean? I'm curious. That's not a thing that we say. But then within that is this invitation of, yeah, like what is mine to own? What is mine to work with? I didn't ask for this, but it's mine. So what do I do with it? And like you said earlier, like there's this, it's all my fault. If there's something wrong with me, I'm causing it to happen to myself. It's yes and no. And the yes part of it isn't in this blaming, shaming, whatever way. It's you have free will and you have choice, and there's ways you're showing up and ways you're thinking and ways you're living in your body that are feeding into what you've been preloaded with and what you've experienced. Those are not your fault. The experiences you had, the people you were born to, the life you had, your ancestors' lives, those are like, what are we going to do about that? That's just part of our fabric. But then it's what do we do with that? And yeah, it's that beautiful dance, like you're saying, between finding what is yours and surrendering to or accepting what is outside of your control, and finding where and how to move between those two spaces so that you can reclaim your power and have a good life, but not to that other extreme where you're like, yeah, everything I have to do, everything, and the food and the this and then that. And I think that food trauma you mentioned is such a big part of that internal control thing, where we then feel everything has to be micromanaged to this other extreme. And obviously that has its own issues. I wondered if you could speak to that food piece. You had that moment where you had that touch work and it helped to bring some appetite back and shift you more into that space and safety where digestion was actually an option. Your body could shift back into. Was there more to you healing your relationship with food beyond that moment too? Because I know so many folks do have food trauma and food fear because of food allergy testing or whatever diagnosis they have. There's so much we do with diet that does create it as, or make it this adversary. It can make food challenging for people. So I'm just curious if there's anything beyond what you did with Sherry that kind of helped heal that if it was necessary.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance because sometimes you are having a physiological reaction to food. So trying to decide what is my fear and what is actually what my body's needing right now. After the mold experience, I did have to eat pretty carefully for those 2.5 years. I was eating kind of an anti-inflammatory diet after that experience. But I do see that the amount of fear I had around food has definitely reduced. Like probably right after Italy, I had more of that, was like orthorexia nervosa, like almost eating disorder of obsession with eating the right things, has to be organic, has to be low FODMAP, but there was a quality of fear behind it, where now I still try to eat what makes my body feel best, but I follow more of that like 80-20 rule, like try to eat what's easy on your system, like 80% of the time. And if, every now and then you have to eat Taco Bell because you're on the road or whatever, like you're gonna be okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that. And I think that kind of fits nicely into that model we were talking about, where it's like, there's some things you can control, there's some things that are out of your control. Because I had the same journey. My illness was all about gut stuff or digestive stuff. If someone's listening to this for the first time, my whole journey is with Crohn's disease, which is autoimmune GI stuff. But that was a big part of mine, was just, I had to decide to let go of stuff and trust, like, I do good most of the time. I know what things I can't eat. There's just some foods that really trigger my immune system and I can't do it. But most of the foods that used to be off limits are fine now. And yeah, I can have fast food every now and then. And it's like my body is okay. It's really so much about, if we are beginning the process of eating from a state of anxiety, just by nature, that's going to shut down our gut and create the conditions in which it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've gotten to a place of intuition with food where I can feel like, what does my body need? What does my body want? And what my body really wants in that moment, and what it would feel okay doing. If I'm on the road, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know if I had that right now, I'd feel really sick. Is there another restaurant that I could go to? I can have that kind of discernment. There's so much of this healing journey is just coming into that dance with your body, whether it's food or relationships or anything else. And we were saying at the beginning, trusting that impulse, even seeing the moldy house, that experience helped you learn, okay, that feeling I had in my body was information. How do I skip the 2 years of grief with mold next time? Because now I know I can build that trust muscle of my body's intelligence and start to listen to that more often. You had said the importance of self-compassion, boundaries, and discernment were the big 3 things your healing journey has taught you. Yeah, I'm curious if you can touch on those things. Those feel like huge, like kind of pillars of healing work in general.
I feel like we've touched on the self-compassion piece a little bit of this isn't all your fault.
Yes.
And also realizing too, when I befriend my protector parts or befriend my nervous system responses, they're much more likely to soften than if I hate them.
Yes.
But then I can get into this weird thing where I'm like, oh, I'll just pretend that I'm befriending them so that they'll change and go away. Yeah, around boundaries, as a highly sensitive person, I had a hard time saying no, being a people pleaser, forcing myself to go to social things because I felt like I had to, or even around food at times where I was having digestive issues. If I went to a friend's house for dinner and they cooked something, I would eat it because I was afraid to say no.
Yeah.
And then I'd have an upset stomach the next day and be like, oh. To be honest, I did have at least one really unhealthy relationship in the last 11 years. That was definitely a very eye-opening experience of the importance of knowing what my needs are and setting boundaries around that rather than being so attuned to other people's needs all the time.
Yes, that's huge. That fawning response, right? Because I think that's such a, going back to what we were just saying of that tuning in and listening to yourself, like that's such a outward constant, like my inside is informed by your needs, or the outside informs my inside. And so, yeah, learning how to have discernment too, right? Like that, what is yours? What is mine? What do I need? Can I compromise, or is it a no kind of thing?
And it's where the embodiment journey has really helped, because I spent the first 30 years of my life mostly in my head. I was so good at attuning to other people's needs. I really didn't know what I was feeling or needing. Being able to come back into my body, you can feel the physical boundary of, oh, this is me. I'm a human. I have a body, muscles, a belly that can feel tense or relaxed. Before I had no awareness of that, being more embodied was super important for me to start setting boundaries with people.
Yes, 100%. I relate to that so much, as I also identify as the highly sensitive person, people pleaser, which I almost think go hand in hand because you're so attuned to others. And like before having discernment and bound and the capacity to say no as an older person, I think there is a lot of that giving that happens. I have found in my own kind of reclamation journey, so to speak, in that sense, there's this almost challenge of feeling like it's enough. If I like it, cool, but no one else is benefiting from that. There's almost like a lack of a dopamine hit around it, so to speak, where there was so much like that I got from meeting other people's needs and bringing value into their life. When I started to take that away, it was almost just, this is boring. What do I care? What do I matter? There was such a lack of worth and value in my own self. That has been a lot of work. And I'm still working through getting to this place of it's enough just if I like it. Like it's okay if just I like it. And that has been a really interesting and unexpected part of the journey.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because a lot of us sensitive people end up in professions like holding space for other people. And I really enjoy what I do, but there's still this part of me that's, oh, am I just like playing out the same pattern of, oh, I get to attune to your needs all the time. So I do try to be mindful of not throwing myself 100% into work and also having some time that's just for me, for whatever I enjoy.
I think it's one of those catch-22s where it's like the thing you're really good at, it's like your greatest wound is also your greatest gift. It's like the shaman and the wounded healer thing, but you have to be mindful of how much of the wound is showing up in the gift, and can you peel them apart and not let that get into the mix, which is challenging because there's a blurry line there, but important work. And I can feel into my body when I'm pushing that line. I get really tired and burnt out, and okay, I'm giving from an empty cup at this point and I need to refill it.
Yeah. And then I feel like the discernment piece is mostly around people. I always want to be a kind person and not be judgmental of others, give people a chance. But just over the years, after having roommates and dated and therapists and practitioners, really just being able to trust my instincts about people and have that discernment of, is this someone I want to trust with my body or my time or my energy? And just feeling comfortable, not just closing the door sometimes.
Absolutely. It's going back to what we said earlier, where like we can blame ourselves for staying in the therapist office for 2 years, but it's like sometimes it's just not a good fit. When we can have that autonomy or authority in those sessions, a practitioner relationship is no different from any other relationship. It's important that it feels good to you, just anything else. Having done the trainings we've done and gone through school, I'm like, yeah, the people doing these trainings are just people like anyone else. Just because they have letters after their name doesn't make them different. It makes them have a different education, but doesn't make them some other species. So that's huge. And I think having that permission for folks is really important for not getting discouraged in healing work, because just because it doesn't work with a person doesn't mean it's not going to work. Doesn't mean you're broken. And it's like getting back into that place of not making it mean something about you and that it's your fault or you're the bad one. It could just be that person doesn't attune to you and doesn't feel safe to your system for whatever reason. But I also honor and understand how exhausting it gets when, there's person after person that's just not feeling right too. So it's such a challenging or tricky dance in that way.
Yeah, it is a tricky dance. So there might be times where you need to make some compromises or be like, I'm going to take what I can from this person and leave the rest. But then again, being able to have that discernment of, is it safe enough or do I need to walk away?
Absolutely. And depending on your particular trauma or experiences, like if there's this feeling of nothing ever works for me, or if someone doesn't work out or disappoints me or fails me in some way, then that's the big trigger. Then it can be really hard to accept the parts that do feel good. If there's that part that doesn't feel good, it's hard to not throw baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. So it's really helpful when we can take a step back and start to view ourselves and our way of showing up in the world as this kind of cause and effect nervous system response versus being so up in it we can't have that discernment like we're talking about. Hence why I'm talking about this stuff and spreading the news and like the books and all the things out there. I think people are more aware of nervous system orientations and attachment styles than they ever have been before. So that can help a lot to maybe start to give things a chance that we would have given up on otherwise. I'm reading too in your notes, like recognizing nervous system dysregulation isn't a personal flaw. It's this reflection of culture. It's epigenetic. It's inherited. It's this response to our life. It's this understandable cause and effect ping pong game. You also wrote that I think is so important. I'll just read what you wrote. It's often a reflection of a culture that's lost its capacity to truly care for and attune to each other. I think that's so huge too, because it's almost that metaphor of you're doing all this healing work and then you end up in a moldy house. It's like we're doing all this healing work and we're still in this world that like can't attune. And so it's like, I feel like I'm trying to open my heart and then it immediately gets shut down because I go on the road and someone honks and flips me off. How do you navigate that? Because the world does feel so hostile and there's so many places where it doesn't feel safe to show up. What does that look like for you?
I'm honestly still figuring it out because I'm trying to be careful of my somatic practice, not to replicate the medical model where I'm like, this is what healthy looks like. The fact of the matter is there are a lot of people, especially in marginalized communities, if you're a woman, if you're queer, because of your religion, because of your economic status, where there's a lot of valid reasons to not feel safe and to have nervous system dysregulation. I don't want to paint the picture of if you're not in ventral vagal all the time, you're not a morally good person. But I also do want to support people in finding a little bit more ventral vagal, a little more regulation in their life, not because it's superior, but because from that place you have more choice. And then ultimately, I want to empower people to feel empowered, to have a sense of agency so they can decide, how do I want to respond to what's happening right now? Even if it's just like a brief moment of being able to feel my feet on the ground and then decide how I'm going to respond. But it really is tricky because I find myself saying to friends sometimes, this isn't all your fault, it's the system, but that doesn't feel good either. I'm still figuring out how to navigate it all.
Totally. And it's really interesting, like for folks who have listened to several episodes of this podcast, a lot of my conversations end up in this place because it inevitably comes to this place of, okay, we can do all this work, but then what about the world? What about the system we're inundated in that just does continuously feel unsafe. It's that balance. What can we control? What's within our realm of what can we work with? What's our free will? What's our choice? What can we do to help us be as regulated as possible? How do we recognize like how we're limited by XYZ factors? But then it's almost like, how can we be the change we want to see in the world? And then also honoring the limitations of like how much that change can go until all of us are embodying that. Like, I think that's how I think of it, is like with my work, I try to not work so much. I try to rest more. I'm trying to create in my own world what this could look like. By doing so, maybe my colleague or friend feels like she has permission to do it that way because she's seeing that I can still survive and not work 9 to 5 every single day. It's just like these slow kind of peeling back of stories, and not everyone has access to those kinds of things. I think we have to find this balance. If someone doesn't have access and I do, I need to model it, make it happen in my own life. And then from my increased capacity by taking care of myself in this different way, find ways to spread that. Because I think there can be this thing of, if they can't have it, I shouldn't. It's more this, if I can have it, I should, because I need it to survive. And then how do I use that increased capacity to find where I'm going to do my work in the world to spread medicine and help heal and bring the changes that need to come. There's some path starting to form where something has to change and we have to be the change makers. How do we start that with ourselves and then go from there?
I do think one thing that can be helpful is just like picking one or two things that you're going to do different versus I used to want to live in community, in nature, where we're growing all of our own food. And that's not happening right now. I could get really worked up if I'm like, oh, this isn't how I want to be living. But if I can just find small ways that maybe I can be living in a way that feels more aligned with me, maybe I can't do that, but I'm going to get off my computer by 7 p.m. Just find little ways that you can actually succeed. So your body gets the message of, oh, I can do something, that it doesn't just go into that collapse of, oh, it's impossible. Yes. If you can make little choices and your system gets that sense of, oh, I do have some choice here.
Yeah, that's such a great way to say it, because I think we do get into that place of, I'm so tired, so I might as well just be more tired. It already is hard. We're not consciously saying that, but through our actions and behaviors, I'm exhausted, but my job is exhausting, so I might as well just stay up till 11, and that could be reclaim some time for myself. But I'm living that right now with my kiddo. He's 4, and it's a very challenging time with his dysregulated nervous system. It's this feeling of constantly being in this survival state, trying to navigate his moods and his little being right now. And I recognized that, yeah, I was neglecting my sleep. I wasn't eating as great. I wasn't moving my body. I wasn't drinking water. It's easy to fall off the wagon and just be in this like, state. And so I'm working on, around the edges of the discomfort, or around the edges of this thing that can't change. What can I change? Like, where's the boundary of what can't and what can change? And so, I can go to bed earlier and get like an hour or 2 more sleep than I'm already getting, which in and of itself is huge. And I can drink some more water. He can be having a tantrum and I can drink water at the same time. So it's just like finding, how do I work around the immovable thing, but what is movable around the immovable thing, so to speak.
Back to that concept of the internal and external locus of control, just like finding maybe 2 to 3 things that you do have control over.
Yes, that is so huge for your nervous system to feel a sense of control. It's a sense of control in a way that is like healing, loving, kind, compassionate, and needed for your system, versus a sense of control of, I'm going to compensate by scrolling on Instagram for 10 hours. That might not be the way you want to take your control back. I get it. I do it, but maybe not. Just being more mindful of what your body is asking for. I feel like we could keep talking for hours, but I have this idea for my podcast where I have this tagline, which is, who is your illness inviting you to become? And so my idea is to start ending the podcast by asking people that question, not to put you on the spot as the first person, but I'm just curious, if you were to answer that question, who did your illness or who did your symptoms invite you to become, or are inviting you to become? What have you learned or evolved or grown from your experience with sacred illness?
I feel it happening in my life right now, which feels surprising and exciting, but I find myself becoming an advocate for somatic work and touch work for developmental trauma, particularly people who have chronic illness. I've been doing a lot of networking in Durham because I just moved here in October. I found myself maybe a week ago talking to an experienced therapist, and he's scared to touch his clients. I actually had 2 conversations with therapists who are scared to touch their clients. I'm sending them research articles. There's this guy, Ofer Zur, who did all this research about touch and therapy, And so many people are afraid of the liability of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of counselors are taught risk management. Don't put yourself in risk. Just don't ever touch a client. There's all this research that when therapists do touch clients in a consensual, attuned way, it actually builds the relationship. It builds the bond. It builds trust. Clients are willing to take more risk in therapy because they feel like this therapist cares about me. I've just been laughing at myself that I'm sending research articles to all these therapists. Please touch us. We want to be touched. And then I've also been collaborating with a research clinic at Duke University that's doing some research about lupus. So I've been talking to some of the doctors there, researching lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, just about the modalities that I work with that I feel are not as well known among conventional medicine.
So it's helping basically spread medicine into these realms. Like they're doing good work, and here's how to take it and make it this more potent, kind of informed somatic healing way, bringing it to that next level, which is so important. I love that. I don't think all illness comes to us to make us healers, but once people go through this healing journey, something comes alive in them. I want people to know that this exists and these modalities exist.
Yes. I like sitting in the seat of healer, but I can also see it morphing at some point where maybe I'm still doing one-on-one sessions, but I'm also doing some kind of advocacy work or public speaking. Actually teaching touch skills to trauma therapists might be something I consider in the future.
That's amazing. I love the way that you hold space and have a presence that is just, this is our first time face to face, but your energy and the space that you hold is very safe and grounded. I can see you being that person to hold space for people wanting to learn and evolve their skill set, but also understand how this can evolve their own practice. I see it growing in ripples from here, which is really exciting. I will put all of your info down below, but you have your website, restorativepresence.com. So you do offer, is it one-on-one in Durham only? You do virtual, correct?
I do virtual as well. The touch work is different in person, but there are ways it can be done virtually as well.
Yeah, so you work with people worldwide then on a virtual level. That information will be down below, and you do some free consult sessions so people can talk to you and see if what they're looking for is a good fit. Your Instagram handle will be down below. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you on this deeper level. Thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your story. There were a lot of like core things or themes that came out of this conversation, but really just that understanding you don't have to rehash the whole story. You don't have to have this whole cognitive understanding in order for your body to let go of things and to heal, and really owning this, like, I'm taking back control, but also I'm knowing it's not my fault. I think these are such powerful themes to root into for folks on a healing journey. So thank you for sharing your medicine and your journey with us. And I'm excited to see where it does take you, like what it is asking you to become, and this like continuous unfolding that's going to happen from here. So thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the work that you do. I was reflecting that when I started my sacred illness journey in 2014, there weren't podcasts like this. So I was really flying solo for those first 5 years. I can imagine what a helpful resource it would be to stumble across this podcast for someone who's just starting to figure things out.
Yeah. And thank you for being part of it, for adding your voice in this. I think you're my first touch work therapist on here, just like putting that modality and the importance of that physical connection, because we do live in such a virtual world, and thank goodness, because it connects people like us and it connects us to our listeners. For the people who can get that in-person, person-to-person connection, nervous system to nervous system connection, that's just another really helpful tool for people to explore if they're looking for something like that. So thanks for adding that to the wheelhouse here.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
All right, guys, until next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. If you find this information shared here inspirational and educational, please share it with those you think would benefit from this work. To take this work deeper yourself, check out our website, www.aurorasomatic.com, where you can explore our coaching, community, and course options. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, where new content is coming out all the time, intended to inspire, awaken, and help you deepen your relationship with yourself, your life, and your world. We'll see you next time.